What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, September 18th, 2018, getting into the week here. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Stuff is happening just all over right now. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. That is really great news. I just heard the spot myself. The Firearms Training Academy promotion is back. And that is a really, really, really good deal. So I hope you'll all take advantage of that. Getting on into the news, we're finally finding out what exactly happened yesterday during the coalition attack on Syria, where a Russian Ilyushin 20 surveillance plane was shot down. And it turns out it was actually shot down by the Syrian air defense system. And the reason that happened is because these 4 Israeli F-16s were flying basically behind it, trying to sneak into Syria, figuring that the air defenses wouldn't engage the Ilyushin. And exactly what happened on the ground, we don't know. The radar may have picked up all 5 of the blips, and they thought they were all Israelis. But that's basically what happened. The plane was actually on its way home. It had been conducting surveillance missions over Idlib, looking for aerial drone workshops, various things like that. And they were basically end of mission and heading home. That's when they got hit. So Russia is expressing a understandable degree of outrage because there's supposed to be this system of keeping everybody's planes and everything apart. And Russia is feeling that Israel, first of all, did not give an adequate warning about the coming strike so that they could get the plane to a safe area. And more importantly, using this tactic unnecessarily endangered the Russian plane, not to mention other planes in the area. So Russia is very, very upset. And it's perfectly understandable. And these 4 F-16s from the Israeli Air Force carried out a strike with guided air missiles against Syrian facilities in the area of Latakia at about 2200 on September 17th. And the fighters came in from the Mediterranean at a low altitude, which created a dangerous situation for service ships and aircraft in that area. Now, Russia is threatening what they're calling an adequate response against Israel for the downed plane. They're saying we cannot allow this to go unanswered. Because of Israel's irresponsible actions, 15 Russian servicemen died. Now, Israel has carried out roughly 200 strikes in Syria over the past year and a half. Basically saying they're pushing back against Tehran's growing presence in the war-torn battle area. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
And Iran wouldn't even be there if it wasn't for the United States, France, Britain, Saudi Arabia, and Israel doing this in the first place. So that's bunk, you know? I agree. That's bunk blaming Hezbollah. You know what I mean? They gave 1 minute notice, like you said. I mean, this was Mike, they used that plane as cannon fodder. It's so obvious, you know? And you know what the adequate response is going to be from Putin? He's going to expand the air defenses. That's what it's going to be, Mike. They're going to expand it. I don't know how far out, but that's what it's going to be.
Well, apparently the missile that shot down the Ilyushin was an S-200, one of the older ones. But it was reportedly a very heavy attack, and it involved not just the Israeli air assets, but missiles fired from the coalition ships out at sea. In fact, Russian radar was able to identify one of them as a French frigate. So they're all ganging up here on Syria right now.
Yeah, I mean, France, I hate to break it to you, but Syria's not a colony of yours anymore. Go home. I mean, my God, Mike, I mean, what is France doing there? You know what I mean? Like, what was this a deal between Macron and Netanyahu or somebody else in the Israeli government? You know, I mean, you know, when I looked at the woman who's like a wretched person for the Israeli, the ambassador,
Yes,
that went to see she didn't look too happy coming out. So, but Mike, I'm telling you, I think Russia's going to expand their air defenses, maybe into Lebanon at this point. But this ain't going to happen again, I'll tell you that, because you know what? Russia's going to have to destroy their runways and their planes on the runway. You know what I mean? Because there's 15 people that just died. And it shouldn't have been. The Israelis shouldn't have been doing this airstrike in the first place.
no, they shouldn't have been. You know, they're basically, it's a covert war. It's not officially declared, but very obviously war is being uncorked on Syria.
And Mike, remember you said one spark, that's all it takes?
Yep.
Well, how many more sparks do you think it's going to take, Mike? You know, I mean, I tell you, this set back Israel a little because all their spokesman was on RT saying it's the Iranians' fault. It's the Iranians' fault. It's the I think Israel got pushed back a little on this, as far as I think. They're a little scared now. I don't think there's going to be any more airstrikes for the next, like, at least 2 weeks. You know.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, you know, Israel wants Iran pushed back. They want the Iranians out of Syria. They've gone to a zero tolerance policy regarding the Iranian assets in Syria, and they're just going to go on bombing until somebody around those Iranian assets starts shooting them down.
Yeah, because remember we kept saying, you know, when they sent Trump sent in the cruise missiles into, you know, if you kill a couple all hell's going to break loose. Well, 15 just got killed on one plane.
Yes.
You know, and that's one small incident. You know, imagine multiple incidents. You know, all hell's going to break loose. You know, because Russia has the assets to do a lot of damage to Israel if they want.
Yeah, but don't forget,
You know,
Israel has nuclear weapons, and Putin's going to be very careful about provoking the situation there. I think you're right. What Russia is going to do is bolster Syria's air defense system so that none of these planes can come on in. Apparently what they've got, though, worked really well. The vast majority of the incoming missiles were intercepted and destroyed, but a few did get through and cause some damage.
Mike, dirty tricks, though, right? Just like the USS Liberty dirty tricks, just like in Ukraine, where they pulled dirty tricks. Remember, there's reports of them shadowing like other like planes, like cargo planes and stuff, to hide under the signature of the. This was a dirty trick, Mike. I don't believe it was no accident. This was intentionally hiding behind the IL-20. That's that's what I think, because it's just so obvious. They get 1 minute notice ain't enough to get anybody out of the way.
No, it really isn't. It really isn't. And, I agree with you that Israel's attack on the USS Liberty, trying to sink it and blame Egypt for it, that was a dirty trick. But, shadowing another aircraft or ship to obscure your presence there is like a common battle tactic. These Israeli pilots were probably doing what they were trained to do, what they thought was going to work. And quite honestly, they thought that because of the presence of the Ilyushin, there wouldn't be any air defense assets pointed their way. Obviously, they were wrong on that, and we don't have a clear picture of whether somebody said, get the Israelis, and they accidentally hit the Ilyushin. Or if somebody thought the Ilyushin was just another Israeli aircraft, if somebody made a goof, we don't know exactly how it gets sawed off. But obviously something went wrong, and that Ilyushin was shot down. But it was the fault of the Israelis, who basically were coming in on its tail to try and infiltrate Syrian airspace. And you're right, they may have second thoughts about it, that they could get shot down by accident. But it is very telling that while the Ilyushin was brought down, none of the Israeli F-16s were. And
I think maybe Russia should start shadowing their own planes with like Su-30s or something like that. And also, doesn't the S-200 have the IFF, the identification for friend and foe?
I don't
You know,
know if
'cause
the
they
S-200 does, but certainly the later missiles do. I mean, IFF has been around for a long time because, unfortunately, it is a sad reality of war that there are friendly fire incidents where your own people are shooting at each other. And IFF was invented to prevent certain missile systems from launching against, a friendly target in a moment of panic.
Yeah, like I said, it just makes me mad because this stuff just a little at a time, it's inching up there to you know where. You know. All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And we're going to go back to the phones to James in Tokyo. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I hope you are well. And how's the Harp Playing Angels back doing? I haven't talked to you in a while.
She's
better.
Slowly but surely, she is getting better. We have another doctor's appointment later this month that's finally going to tell us just how the fracture has fused and if it's straight and aligned and so forth and so on. She's feeling very frustrated. It's taken a very, very long time. This incident actually happened all the way back in January, and she's still having to wear a back brace, and she's still having to deal with the pain. So she's very frustrated, and I've banned her from doing housework, which actually is unfortunately making the frustration even worse. But she just has to take the time to heal. This was a serious injury. She literally broke her back.
I know, and I feel really bad. And you should also ban her from having sex because personally, I don't believe in sex before marriage, and I'm not too sure about afterwards. Anyway, Mike, I want to talk about Iran. You mentioned yesterday how you were against, Trump putting the screws on Iran. I felt that way initially, but I changed my mind after hearing numerous sources, including government officials from Iran themselves, come out and say that if this whole deal stuff isn't worked out, they're going to start giving names of European officials that they bribed to consummate this deal to allow European countries to enter Iran. It's also said that when Obama, for some reason, sends cash over in airplanes, that some of the planes didn't even land in Iran. So there's a lot of stuff maybe going down that maybe we all don't know about.
Well,
also,
we're trying to find it out as fast as we can.
And I want to talk about China briefly.
Well, before you go to China, Iran is basically trying to find a peaceful way to deal with this obvious economic aggression by the United States and its allies. Now, nobody ever produced any evidence that Iran was actually building a nuclear weapon. As a signature to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, they are allowed to build nuclear power stations. They are allowed to make their own fuel rods. And nobody has found anything that looked like a weapons program. Iran has basically repudiated the use of nuclear weapons. They don't want to get into that rat race, as it were. But still came up with this nuclear deal for Iran to basically surrender its rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in exchange for an easing of U.S. sanctions. And now, of course, Trump has unilaterally pulled out of the P5+1 deal and thrown as many sanctions onto Iran as he can, with probably more to come. Iran is feeling the pressure. They're trying to keep the rest of the signators in the P5+1 to emphasize the fact that this is all coming from Donald Trump, that they had a working deal that everybody agreed was working just fine. The IAEA, even to this very day, says Iran is fully in compliance with the requirements of the nuclear deal. But Iran is they're seeking economic help from Europe because of the pressure on their economy. They're looking for somebody who's going to be willing to defy the United States embargo on Iran's oil, which they've already found a few. But Iran is starting to play hardball because they really don't have any other choice.
Well, the IAEA and Europe are saying that Iran is in compliance, but it is said that these people have received bribes, which is why they are saying that. And Trump, I believe, in his current position as president of the United States, might have a little more information than other people, which is also why you might see people like John Kerry maybe almost breaking the Logan Act, going over there and trying to smooth things over so all this stuff doesn't come out. So what I think is that Trump is playing hardball and is going to make them to comply. For example, even North Korea has to comply with a lot of stuff.
To make Iran comply with what? They're already in compliance. What Trump wants is he wants to force a new deal.
It is said that they are in compliance. And however, it is also said that they have been giving bribes, even by their own government officials, even by Iran themselves, that they're going to tell who these people were if all this stuff wasn't worked out.
Well, that sounds to me like the bribes went to the. Hang on, James. It sounds to me, and first of all, I'm looking for confirmation on this because I had not heard this yet. And there's so much fake news being thrown around these days. We got to double check everything. But it sounds to me like the bribes were going to European Union, or were basically going to officials in the countries that signed the P5+1 deal. And that I think you're taking a bit of a leap, implying that the IAEA is being bribed to say that Iran is in compliance. Because again, prior to this whole P5+1 deal, Iran was playing by the rules. As a signatory to the NNPT, they were under constant inspections and surveillance by the IAEA. And at this particular point, I want to wait for some more confirmation about this bribery story. But what Donald Trump,
European members who signed up for this are going to overlook any non-compliance on the part of Iran for receiving their bribes. I'm saying is, if Iran complied, then I think America basically should adhere to the agreement. If they haven't, and if this whole bribery scandal comes out, for example, like this whole frame-up stuff is coming out now against Donald Trump with the release of all these documents, then I think that you might agree that Trump is doing the right thing. So I think what it takes now from both of us is a little time more to clarify things.
Let me ask you a question. Okay, when was the last time that Iran initiated a war of conquest against another nation?
Oh, probably maybe about a year or two before you were born, Michael.
It's 200 years. And they certainly have not initiated a war of conquest against their neighbors ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. It's not in their nature. They're not a warlike people.
I agree.
Okay, I mean, contrast that with Israel and the United States, which can't seem to go for a month without bombing somebody. The Iranians just want to be left alone.
Not a month. I think like a day. But yeah, I agree with you totally about that. Hey, can I move on to China quickly?
Actually, we're coming up here on a commercial break. I'm going to have to put you on hold and let you come on back after that break. I mean, you can start, but we've only got 20 seconds left.
Well, before you mention, you talk about Russia and how it's been very good for them with all the sanctions, and they've been able to make their economy more self-sufficient. And yet, when it comes to America, you're kind of down on America for putting the sanctions on China because a lot of these products will become more expensive, and I could finish that after the break.
Yeah, we got to take a break here, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And once again, we are standing in front of you with the collection plate out because we need your help to keep doing what we are doing. And there's no such thing as too small a donation. Every little tiny bit helps. So, the postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can do a debit or credit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during normal business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And don't forget that Firearms Training Academy promotion it's back. And that is a really, really good deal. And for those of you wishing to donate to what really happened, and we need that, we need your help, you can hit that donate button on the main page. All right, let's go back to the phones. Ooh, the lines are getting really loaded up here. Okay, James, my concern about a tariff war with China is it was ill-timed. Say again?
I just heard you say about the donation. I just heard you talk about the donations, and I'm going to send my third one soon. But when I did my first one, I asked for a small signed photograph by you, and I never got it. But I'm still going to send my third one.
Oh, I apologize for that. We actually have the photos. And I'll make a point of remembering this time.
All right, thanks, man. Okay, so back to China. So I've actually been to China. It was like 20-something years ago. I helped my father-in-law set up a chemical factory there. And the first thing I noticed when I got off the airport and get out on the streets is there was like everything from, Cartier watches to Louis Vuitton bags to American cars and this and that, and it's to McDonald's, and it's all fake. And plus, with the technology transfers, plus you're talking about how Russia's become self-sufficient by, having to produce stuff by themselves. And I think what they're doing in China is a good thing, although I do appreciate cheap Chinese goods, especially living in Japan, which is maybe the second most expensive city in the world.
Well, again, the issue of China counterfeiting products, that is a big one. And China seems rather intractable on that. But I think we should have put a little more investment into rebuilding U.S. manufacturing before we got into a tariff war with them. Because Trump is throwing all these tariffs on imports from China. China is responding back with their tariffs, but it's largely symbolic because the U.S. doesn't really have a lot China wants to buy. That's a big reason the trade imbalance is as great as it is. Now, back when we were a manufacturing powerhouse, we made a lot of products that were the best in the world, and people were willing to pay the higher prices to get them. Those days right now are gone. Our manufacturing has been declining for 30 years. It's not going to come back overnight.
I think you're wrong and right. I think, no one's going to put money into manufacturing. When this kind of, deal with, the free trade with China, where China can do everything and America is tariffed and copied and the technology transferred. And it's just, I think it's just a very, very terrible thing that's happening to a manufacturer. But the manufacturer cannot come back unless these tariffs are done. The same way that you espouse, the benefits of Russia having to become self-sufficient and depend less on their oil industry. And lastly, I just want to talk briefly about the American economy. I hear Dustin from New Jersey always saying that it doesn't benefit the ordinary people. Well, I'm an ordinary people, although I am in Japan, but I don't have Social Security in America. I don't have a Social Security in Japan, but I have some investments, two main investments in America, basically prisons and refineries. And personally, Trump has turned my whole life around, where with prisons, they're allowing, the federal agencies to do private prisons again. And as far as refineries, they allowed small refineries to eliminate RIN costs, which is basically putting ethanol into like a percentage of ethanol into oil in order to make gasoline. And by those two actions, it turned my life around, and now I'm 55 and I can finally retire, basically directly thanks to Trump. So The rich people I know in the U.S., it hasn't changed them pretty much. The severe poorly people I know, it hasn't really changed so much. But the middle class people I know in America, friends of mine I still keep in touch with, they're doing a lot better. I don't know. What do you think?
You must have a very select set of people, because looking around here on Hawaii, we can see the decline. Anyway, listen, I need to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials. The phone lines are loaded on up, and we'll be right back.
Thanks for talking, Mike.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we get back to the phones here, somebody just sent me an article about this claim that Iran is going to reveal which officials, which Western politicians took bribes to make the Iran deal happen. But this is not actually originating from Iran. The story is coming out of the Jerusalem Post. And so I would want to hear confirmation from Iran that somebody in their government actually said this. Again, truth is the first casualty of war, and we are currently living in an ocean of lies. So we need to keep a look on this. Keep watch on it. All right, let's see. Getting on back here to the phones. Art, off the grid. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing, man?
Doing fine.
I think you and I are pretty much about the same age. And, you know, when I was in school, social studies was mandatory part of the curriculum.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure it was for you as well. Sadly, they don't teach social studies anymore, because if they did, more people would know how the government is supposed to function than actually do.
Yes.
With regards to the Kavanaugh hearing, interesting, Miss Susan Collins, you know, lady, you have got to be a complete and utter idiot. And I'll tell you why I say this. Anyone who knows how the system and how the government is supposed to work and function knows that congressional hearings and confirmation hearings are held and function basically in the same manner. Only with congressional hearings, they will call people in to testify on an issue, whereas confirmation hearings, they are basically doing an interview for a position. Now, the only people in there, other than maybe reporters and some witness, you know, people who want to sit and, you know, kind of like in a courtroom, kind of the same thing, where you have people come and they sit and they watch. No one else is supposed to participate. You got Susan Collins wants to bring in Kavanaugh's attorney and this other lady's attorney so that her attorney can question Kavanaugh and his attorney can question her. I'm sorry. When the hell did this turn into a damn trial?
Well, they're trying to try him in the media, but you're absolutely right. It's completely inappropriate. Outside lawyers have no place there. Kavanaugh is supposed to be questioned by the senators, and that will basically be it. But, you know, we're going to be talking about Kavanaugh a lot further into the show here. But apparently there is now an ad campaign. They are so desperate to try and get the American people to call their senators and say, vote Kavanaugh down. Apparently they're putting up ads all over the place now. And there's absolutely no proof of any of it. This is Anita Hill all over again.
Yeah, they even tried to threaten Collins with some kind of GoFundMe account that if you do this, we'll put the money towards something else, but if you do this, we'll put the money towards somebody to run against you. This is absolutely insane. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask you a question. If you went to a job interview and found yourself sitting there before a panel and you were questioned by an attorney, would you want that job? And with that, I'll leave with one more thought. If we allow this kind of stuff to happen, where they turn these congressional, because if we let it happen at a confirmation hearing, we're going to have to let this kind of stuff happen at congressional hearings as well. And if we allow that to happen, we are one step away from the globalist agenda, where instead of going into a court of law, you will go into the International Criminal Court, and you won't stand a damn chance. America, you better wake the hell up.
All right. Well, Thank you for your phone call, and you make some very, very good points. But the Democrats are trying to turn this into a circus. But like I said, we're going to be talking about that a little further into the show. Thank you for the phone call, Art. We're going to take another phone call. This is Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. I ran across an article today from Breitbart, and it's talking about, and I forget what the headline actually said, but it was to the tune of $3.4 million being funded by the Tavistock Industry or Institute to sterilize children. Thought that was kind of a weird headline. I was wondering if you had any more information on that. Or what
I
type
had
of
not
children?
caught that yet. I'll definitely take a look at it. But, part of the New World Order globalist agenda is to drastically reduce the human population, which wars are really good for. If you remember the Georgia Guidestones, it calls for reducing the global human population to just 500 million, which sounds like a really nice idea. But again, I have a real issue with people playing God with other people's lives, and the idea of sterilizing children. I mean, if adults want to get sterilized, if guys want to get a vasectomy or something like that, that's one thing. Children, they're too young to make that choice or to even understand its implications.
Absolutely. Now this next thing that I want to tell you, I said it on Trump Phenomenon, Jamie's broadcast, but this affects, you, Jamie, Mr. Steve Elkins, and the owner, John. You guys don't know how much you've touched my life. You've helped me put a bottle down, just stop feeling sorry for myself and actually standing out for what's right. And I want to thank you.
Well, you're very welcome.
Of what you've done.
You're very welcome, and thank you for those very kind words. Sometimes we don't actually get a lot of feedback from out there in the audience. Radio is, except for the phone calls, radio is a one-way broadcast, and it's very hard to know whether we're having an impact or not. So I'm very glad that we were able to be of benefit to you, and I thank you for those kind words.
Well, you have a great day, sir.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open again, and we're going to get on back to this situation in Syria. Now, Russia and Israel have had fairly good ties despite the turmoil in the Middle East. Now, when they were in Syria, there was supposed to be this system of communication to keep the various engaged players out of each other's ways. That clearly broke down yesterday. And a lot of people, there's an article from Russia Today saying that Russia-Israel ties could suffer from this incident. And I guess Netanyahu is realizing this was a big whoopsie, because apparently Netanyahu made a telephone call to Vladimir Putin where he expressed his regret at the loss of Russian lives, which is probably going to be as close to an outright apology as we're ever going to see. And Netanyahu, of course, stressed the importance of continuing coordination in the security area between Israel and Russia. And again, that's the part that broke down last night. Syria's Sana news agency is saying that the air defense system did down the majority of missiles aimed at Latakia. And apparently the state technical industry institutions in Latakia had been targeted, adding that they were likely a result of Israeli strikes on that state technical company, which is connected with the military. They also hit the power station in Latakia and, for some reason, an aluminum factory. So one of the other issues is that there were a lot of missiles, more than could be carried on those Israeli aircraft. So some of the ships out there in the eastern Mediterranean were involved in the attack, and Russian radar actually tracked, where they were able to get a good track on one of the missiles coming in and trace it back to a French frigate the Auvergne, which is France's newest frigate. It's a missile carrier, obviously. And again, this is edging so close to full-on war, which is basically what the U.S. wants here. Okay, all right, we're going to take another phone call, and we have Lila in Ontario. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I was wondering, how does the IAEA conduct its inspections? Because I've just looked at the list of members, and every one of them looks to me like they are not likely to know the intricacies of nuclear weaponry, and searching for evidence of it would require a great deal of knowledge and high-level sophisticated knowledge. So I'm wondering, do you know how they conduct their inspections?
Yeah.
Because as I said, the list of members...
Well, what you're looking at is basically the governance, the people in charge of the agency. But they send out highly trained technical inspection teams that go to Iran on a regular basis, and they go around to the various places where items are stored and make sure that the locks are still in place. And I believe they also have continuous closed-circuit TV cameras operating in some of these areas as well.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like now, but I do know that a member of the PFLP was once a member of the inspection team when they were checking out Iraq. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, there's going to be a kind of ethnic bias there or religious bias, but when you have weak member states, and the exact identity of the inspectors is not known, it certainly is possible, because bribery is it's so common in human nature to be vulnerable. And certainly a nation as old as Iran would have perfected the art of bribery.
Well, again, you're making the
case.
assumption that Iran had something to hide. Okay, and until you come up with some, evidence of that, I think we need to look at this inspection process at face value. I mean, even before all this whole P5+1 deal came on up, Iran was going with the conditions, the provisions of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which said they were allowed to build nuclear power stations or have them built. They contracted with Russia to do that. And they were allowed to enrich uranium to make fuel rods and various other nuclear products, like industrial destaticers or these machines that are used to X-ray buildings to check for structural failures.
No, it's not I alone that's making the assumption. I mean, there's already a presumption that people or countries will not always be open with regard to what their activities are.
Well, that's certainly true of Israel.
Well, of anybody. I mean, Israel certainly is top of the list, but that doesn't mean that everyone else should be taken at face value, especially when there are centuries of enmity that they've been involved in. So anyway, it was just a question about how we find out the identity of the inspectors and how exactly and what their schedule is. Because I did a search on the site, and I asked for the querying the procedure of the inspection, and couldn't find anything. And that surprised me that they don't publish this, because one of the things that came down in the drop-down menu was the inspections in Iraq. And that's long ago. I looked for Iran, and there's nothing. It came up with absolutely a blank space. So I think it's interesting that they should publish the names of the inspectors, the qualifications of the inspectors, and the schedule on which inspections are done. I'm not saying that there's
that would expose the inspectors to even greater outside pressure, harassment. Remember, during the inspections in Iraq, one of the American technicians, one of the American representatives there, was actually accused of trying to plant a sample of weapons-grade uranium in one of the Iraq facilities. And when the rest of the IAEA demanded the sample be turned on over to compare, the U.S. team simply destroyed all the samples. So there was something going,
Yes.
I imagine probably a lot of these inspectors are also intelligence assets. But again, I keep thinking back to how everyone was saying Saddam had nuclear weapons, Saddam had nuclear weapons, Saddam had nuclear weapons, and it turned out, no, he did not. So I'm not inclined to listen to people who are now screaming, Iran is going to build nuclear weapons, Iran is going to build nuclear weapons, because frankly, I'm sick and tired of getting lied to about all of this nonsense.
I agree, and I've always been a defender of Iran. However, the whole notion of people being above questioning, or at least speculating on the possibility of bribery, is certainly something that should always be kept in mind. And their identity is easily known to those who want to know and who have the resources to find out. So I don't think publishing the schedule and the qualifications of the inspectors is necessarily going to place them in jeopardy or make them more vulnerable to pressures of any kind. But anyway, I just don't like taking anything at face value anymore. As I said before, believe only half of what you see and none of what you hear.
I would agree with you, and of course, the way that IAEA would get around the possibility of bribery from Iran is to rotate the inspection teams. Sooner or later, somebody's going to blow the whistle on this, if it was really happening.
Yeah, if they're able to. I mean, look what happened to Iran.
Well, they don't stay in Iran.
Whistleblowing isn't necessary. Yes, but whistleblowing is no longer a safe activity. But anyway, nothing should be taken at face value is my personal philosophy. Anyway, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. I mean, frankly, if there was any kind of bribery going on with the IAEA, they would have to bribe so many of the inspectors on a recurring basis. If it were happening, we would have heard about it by now. I think this is just more of trying to demonize Iran ahead of making war on it. We have seen this pattern so many times before. Please don't fall for it again. All wars are started with lies, fraud, and deception. We saw that certainly with Iraq, and here we go again with Iran. We got to take a break for commercials. We've got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take another phone call. Frank in London. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was just wanted to ask, Mike, just a couple of things. Does Iran have a group of inspectors that is allowed to travel to the U.S. or Britain or France to inspect their nuclear capabilities?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now, technically, the IAEA does inspect the nuclear facilities and weapons of everybody who signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But they've only been allowed into Israel once, and Israel literally built a fake wall to hide the passageway to the bomb factory under the Dimona reactor.
Well, Israel can always hide behind their exceptionalism, I suppose. They can say, well, they are exceptional whenever it's revealed that they do have nuclear capabilities. And I'm sure that's one of
Netanyahu pretty much, dropped the pretense in a speech he made a little while ago about, he was threatening the other nations in the Middle East and saying, you know what we can do. It's an open secret. Everybody knows Israel's got these nuclear weapons. They know how they got them. They've known about it ever since Mordecai Ben-Nunu blew the whistle on them. And it's almost funny. If it wasn't such a serious topic, it would be funny seeing our politicians going on with this this phony play of pretending they don't know Israel has nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Well, my eyes opened I don't even remember the first Gulf War. That's when I started questioning things. And you opened my eyes further it expanded my conscious awareness of what's going on when you said, I think a couple of years ago, that Iran has not invaded another country for 2 centuries. And, I remember the 10-year war between Iran and Iraq, and I've always had these the propaganda fed to me by the BBC about how what the war was and how evil these Iranian was, and so that's I was brainwashed with for a long time, and until I started doing my own research and basically analyzing things for myself. And I realized that sometimes a lot of these powers in the West now, logic, truth, and justice does not always exist. Does not come in the same sentence with them.
No, there's a lot of propaganda, and this is just more of the same thing here. Now, just to clarify things, I don't think a nuclear-armed Iran would be a bad thing, because countries want nuclear weapons as a deterrent so that they can't be invaded. And that's why the U.S. is trying to get North Korea to get rid of its nukes, and they're trying to make sure that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. And now they're after the long-range missiles. They want it to be an easy cakewalk to take these countries over. And given that every nation that has surrendered weapons of mass destruction to U.S. pressure has been subsequently invaded, I could understand why Kim Jong-un is maybe a little bit cautious about giving up his nuclear weapons. And
agreed.
Remember, for all this talk about Saddam's nukes and Iran's nukes and everybody else's nukes, only one country has ever actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction on the civilians of another country, and that is the United States of America. We got to take a break for station identification. Thank you for the call, Frank, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Well, Russia was saying that after the shoot down of the Ilyushin 20, there was going to be a response, and now we're finding out it's going to go through the courts. Russia is instituting criminal proceedings against Israel for the actions that led to the shoot down of the Ilyushin. What's really interesting is that this article, which came on out from Veterans Today, is being blocked by Google. And Google will not translate or copy. Fortunately, Veterans Today has their own. But apparently, they're going to conduct an investigation as to exactly what happened, and they're probably going to take Israel to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which, of course, Nikki Haley will be screaming and crying and tearing her hair out. Interestingly enough, just before this attack on Latakia, a whole bunch of NATO warships were amassing in the area. There's a lot of hardware sitting there. And the Eastern Mediterranean is being patrolled by the Canadian Navy frigate HMCS Wilde Queb, by the Greek Navy ship Elly, and the Dutch Navy frigate HNLMS De Ruyter. So I don't think this is over. I don't think people are going to back down. They've got too many assets there to not go ahead with staging some kind of a false flag and say the war is back on. Yeehaw, my stock portfolio is loaded up with defense stocks and I'm going to get rich here. The Russian military did find the crash site and they recovered as many of the bodies in pretty bad condition as they were able to. So they're going to take those back home. Interestingly enough, there has been almost no mention of this on the American corporate media. It's still all Florence. It's still all Kavanaugh. Not a mention of this. We're hovering at the edge of outright conflict with Russia. There have been one or two mentions which leave out Israel's role. The American corporate media is reporting that Syria accidentally shot down this Russian warplane. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Mark in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. It's been a while since I've talked to you. A lot is on my mind. First of all, the Trump. Everybody has their issues with him, and being a black person in Southern California, my biggest issue with him is I think he's turned his back on his supporters.
I agree.
Especially, I think, being in Southern California, sir, I had to support him. If I did, I had to support him in stealth, because to do so any other way would have been putting my safety at great risk.
Yeah, that was a real problem.
The Ron Paul campaign, I was able to put a big old Ron Paul sticker on the side of an old Chevy lowrider and roll all through the valley for a while without getting much, opposition. Most people just didn't know or didn't care or just figured, oh, well, he's for him because he's a druggie, And it took a while before I actually got the nerve to go to L.A. wearing anything Ron Paul, but it wasn't that bad. But the signs early on clearly told you that you do anything Trump, and it's like you will be sought out violently.
Yes.
And that is still something that I believe is not addressed nearly enough. And for that alone, if I had 5 minutes with him, I'd tell him, you won't get my vote next time, man.
It's not up to Trump. It's not up to Trump. It's the Democrats, the liberals who are doing this, and the reason it's still going on is they're going to do the same thing going into the November midterms. It's a strategy that has been working for them to literally physically threaten the opposing party and the opposing voters. I mean, you got Maxine Waters is out there calling for somebody to knock off Donald Trump. That's where it's going. We're virtually in a civil war. We don't have rockets, but that's where we are.
Pastor Mike, I know how you believe it, but I know you're from California, and I know, I used to tell my mom, who I just lost, that you were my pastor. And because I know, you're a Californian, and I know you've been ordained, in California. Yep. I think about you sometimes when I pass the Jack in the Box on Laurel Canyon, because I know that was a spot that you had mentioned in one of your shows.
That's where I met Claire. Yeah.
I hardly ever call, but I listen all the time, a day behind, thanks to Ron Gibson. So my heart is beating like 1,000 miles a minute because I'm, other than the seriousness involved, I still have that, like I'm talking to, you're a rock star to me. Okay. I don't care about LeBron James or any of that other stuff. I have a lot of friends here in the San Fernando Valley, but they do not touch anything with me politically.
Yeah.
Okay. I literally ride around in a classic, beautiful convertible Chevrolet, a 68 Chevrolet. I'm in LA. I'm in the Valley every day. And the Chevrolet has a big sticker on the back that says support the Second Amendment. And on the side window, there's the sticker that pretty much puts down mainstream media, CNN. Everything on that is like it's like a covert way of saying I'm a conservative. And I don't get attacked because there's nothing Trump on the car, but I totally get ignored. And the kids who don't understand what the stuff is, they look at the car and they kind of give me props, but they don't look at the stickers and say anything. And the ones that know what the stickers are, I mean, clearly, I'm sure I've seen Second Amendment people. I've wore, in July, I wear a shirt that says, never forget the USS Liberty. And it's a huge shirt. And I wear that in public at places like gun stores and no one says anything. Now, I don't know if I'm being paranoid because, well, maybe I can't be a part of the club that I want to be a part of because it's a racial thing? Or Marky, come on, is that paranoia? Or are they just really liberal themselves? Or are they just, are they scared to like say, you know what, dude, I agree with you about the liberty, or I agree with you about the Second Amendment? No one says anything out here in California.
Well,
I mean,
you
I see
are
these
living
demonstrations and stuff.
You're living in a liberal stronghold. I mean, there's just no two ways about it.
Oh,
and
kidding?
In the spirit of the First Amendment, all of us should be able to walk around with whatever shirts or jackets or bumper stickers we want. But, starting in 2016, we started to see liberalism turn toward violence. Anyway, listen, I need to let you go. I need to take one more phone call. Then we're going to close the phone lines because I'm way, way behind on my talking points. So let's switch over to Keith Rogers. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. Excuse me, I got the hiccups all of a sudden. What's on your mind?
Hope I didn't cause that. Anyway. Hey, one thing that I noticed here on Twitter, as you mentioned there with Russia, that Russia is going to work through the courts, and yet even Russian papers are saying that this is one of the titles from Russian Insider. It says, Putin to powers attacking Syria. Please keep getting my soldiers killed. I won't do anything about it. And apparently there are war hawks everywhere, because my Twitter feed is all about everyone wants Russia to attack. And again, Putin, being the level-headed man that he is, the statesman, is trying to work in other means to prevent war.
Well, he's taking the high ground, and also Trump understands, or rather Putin understands, that whoever attacks first will be seen as the bad guy. And that's the reason there's been so much goading of Russia. And it may be that, in point of fact, this Ilyushin was shot down intentionally as a provocation, and maybe Syria and Russia decided they were going to have a cover story that it was an accident. It's hard to know because of all the deception that goes on during war. But Putin understands that if he attacks first, world opinion will turn against him. He's playing the high ground, and I know he's getting a lot of pressure from his own people back home. And certainly there's a massive propaganda effort out there trying to goad this war along, which is just utter insanity. Because if we get into a war with Russia, we're also going to be in a war with China. And at some point, whichever side is starting to lose will resort to the nuclear arsenal. And I keep going back to this article that Paul Craig Roberts wrote about, I think it was 2 months ago, where he said there are actually people in Washington, D.C. seriously discussing nuclear weapons against Russia.
Right. The other thing I noticed here is that, growing up there, I always remember hearing people say, yeah, I just got back. I went down and voted. Today, it's who you voted for. This party politics stuff is what really gets me. But I was at the doctor's, well, actually 3 different doctors yesterday there, and in the waiting rooms at each one like that, I had a nice chance to talk with quite a few people there. But I can't believe the I'll call it real. This is actual anger of people that want Hillary in prison. And I was sitting there and I drew up my YouTube channel for this elderly couple, about, 15 years older than I was. And I played that video, Trey Gowdy, We Make Law, on my YouTube channel there, where it showed all the missile technology being sent to China from Bill Clinton for Chinagate. And they said, I never heard of that. And I said, that's right. I said, they use that Hummer in the White House to cover that. And the one gal says that she needs to be in prison. I says, no. I said, she needs to be executed after a legal trial like that to save the taxpayers' money. And 2 guys across the thing there clapped when I said that.
Yeah.
But
I'm not
surprised. But again, we're back to the same thing with the media, Mike, is that no one knows anything because the media covers so much corruption. It's pathetic. And then as far as this Russian thing, it was the same provocation there with the airplane over there in Ukraine, the MH jet that went down. The loss of life is tragic anyway. It's the same as if an Osprey goes down or any of these other planes,
Yes.
The death is death. But people have gotten so callous to seeing death anymore because, hell, they've been watching Afghanistan, Iraq, and, hundreds of thousands of people dying.
Millions.
And it only affects them when it hurts them on their doorstep, like there's a school shooting or whatever like that locally. Then suddenly Americans get afraid, and then, our liberties are affected in some way.
Yep. Well,
Anyway,
I think there's still, for a lot of Americans, there's a sense of denial about what's really going on. And again, as we mentioned today, the corporate media is absolutely not telling Americans what's going on. We're being commoditized. It's distractions. And like I said, looking at Fox News, it's been nothing but Kavanaugh and the aftermath of Tropical Storm Florence, which is bad news, by the way. I don't mean to trivialize the people in the Carolinas right now and their suffering. Anyway, listen, Keith, thank you for the phone call.
One more thing, Mike. One more thing.
Okay.
Can I get one more thing here since
Yeah.
you brought that up? I have a friend named Dale who, on Twitter there. He lost his son in Afghanistan. And he has been quite vocal here lately since his son was sent there to fight Al-Qaeda, these men in caves. And now as he sees this unfold over there in Idlib, you want to talk about a man that is pissed off because he lost his son over a lie.
Yes.
That is the extent of what the American people are waking up to. Anyway, thank you. Okay, well, have a good one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network, or actually they rejoined about 10 minutes ago. We are going to take one more call. Dustin from New Jersey wanted to have a response to Mark. And so, Dustin, welcome back to the show. What's your comment?
Yeah, Mike, on California, dude, do not put a sticker on that car. Do not put a hat on your head. You're behind enemy lines, just like the whole east and west coast is basically enemy lines because they've been brainwashed. For some reason, the middle of the country, the flyover country, has the brains. For some reason, the east and west coast has just been indoctrinated. It's crazy. I never seen anything like it, Mike. I mean, I try to talk to people, and it goes over their head. Like, yep. I never seen anything like it. I just don't know how to. And Mike, real quick, can I respond to the gentleman in Japan? Mike, when we went from manufacturing economy to a consumption, now I want people to think about this. Now, if you're a consumption, then if the tariffs will increase the prices, if we got people barely making ends meet now, they're not going to be able to afford these increased prices on products. But Mike, if the things are made here, there'll be even higher prices. So how the hell would they be able to afford those products if they're made here, like Apple, iPhones, or iPads? They wouldn't at all, right?
Yeah.
The government wouldn't make no revenue.
You're absolutely right. We don't have the manufacturing to compete with China just yet. And because of our higher cost of living, the labor costs are going to be intense. But of course, we're hearing more and more that robots and automation are going to be used, which means we're not going to see the jobs come back, even if the manufacturing comes back to the United States of America.
And real quick on the Afghanistan thing, Mike, his friend's son died. Remember, Donald Rumsfeld said they had these elaborate underground bases with like tank bunkers and all this sophisticated air filtration. There was nothing like that there. It was all a lie.
Yep.
And remember IL-20, Mike. Also the Liberty, 9/11, and IL-20, because this is all BS, Mike.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Mike.
And MH17. Okay, thank you for the call. We're going to close the lines here because I'm way behind on the talking points. Now, what's interesting about the timing of the strike into Syria is it came almost immediately after that Turkey and Russia basically secured a ceasefire and declared there was going to be a demilitarized zone in Idlib that would basically be an end to the fighting. And Russia announced there was going to be no operation to go into Idlib. They're just going to let them sit there until they get bored and go someplace else. So the timing is very suspicious of this attack on Syria. I think somebody somewhere wanted to derail the possibility of peace actually coming to the country here. But there's another aspect, and Claire actually came up with this one. If you look at a map of Idlib, you'll notice it's very close to Afrin, which Turkey has already sort of extended into and placed under Turkish control. Now, originally, Turkey said this is just temporary until we get the terrorists out, but they're not showing any signs of wanting to leave. So Turkey is now embedding into Idlib, and it raises a possibility that Turkey might be thinking of annexing Idlib and extending their borders further into Syria, which would make Aleppo a border town. Now, I can't imagine that Assad would be very happy with that, but Assad right now is unfortunately busy in other areas here. Okay, Iraq is getting ready to deploy more of their troops to the Turkish border because there are all these cross-border incursions by Turkish forces into northern Iraq under the pretext of attacking Kurds. And so there's friction building up over there as well. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier in the show, but Israel has now come on out talking about Operation Good Neighbor, and I'll elucidate further when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Okay, and welcome back to our show. We're talking about Israel, which is running something called Operation Good Neighbor, and it is basically their war policy against Iran. And Israel has confirmed they've carried out over 200 attacks against targets in Syria, which they claim are linked to Iran. And this is over the last 2 years. And apparently, in addition to that, Israel has secretly armed and funded at least 12 Syrian rebel groups in southern Syria since 2013. And Netanyahu's basically out there saying that Israel is taking a zero-tolerance policy, meaning they're going to go on attacking Syria, claiming that they're attacking Iran. And of course, that is not going to work very well for regional stability. Meanwhile, over in the U.S., proving how petty people can be, the United States State Department has revoked the visas for the family of the PLO ambassador. And this is the latest development in the worsening relations between the Trump administration and the Palestinian leadership. Ambassador Hussam Zamlat, head of the delegation to the United States, said his family, including his 2 young children, left the United States after being informed their visas would now expire when the diplomatic office is closed next month. The visas were supposed to expire in 2020. So it's just another way of dissing the Palestinians. But we've reached a turning point, and there was this interesting article over at Middle East Monitor saying the Israel-Palestine mask is off, and it may never be reworn with the same naivete. And they're commenting on the fact that the U.S. is clearly very biased in the issues between Israel and Palestine. Now, not all that long ago, pre-9/11, the U.S. tried to maintain the image that it was an unbiased, objective arbiter in the issue of Palestinian homeland. And we know that Israel was already compromising our politicians even back then. But boy, ever since 9/11, whatever Israel wants, Israel gets, and especially with Donald Trump in the White House, things are looking very, very bad for the Palestinian people who basically had their country stolen from them all those years ago. Now, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak has come on out and criticized Benjamin Netanyahu for passing corrupt legislation, and even compared Netanyahu to Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, who was overthrown and executed in 1989. So Ehud Barak was giving a speech in Tel Aviv, and he said the moral collapse of Netanyahu has begotten laws whose only purpose is to help the government escape the corruption, bribery, and breach of trust affairs it is suspected in. As you know, Netanyahu is facing all kinds of corruption charges. Barak actually dropped a hint that Netanyahu could face the same fate as Ceausescu, who was basically overthrown after mass protest against him, and then he was executed by machine gun fire live on Romanian TV. Now, the Likud is out there saying that this is incitement. Ehud Barak is inciting to kill Netanyahu. How dare you do that? So apparently things are not going smoothly, even within Israel's own political structure. Meanwhile, once again, yesterday, settlers from the illegal settlements stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque under heavy protection of Israeli forces and basically performed Jewish prayers and religious rituals on the grounds of the mosque, supposedly because we're right now in the middle of the major Jewish holidays. Yom Kippur will be on Wednesday. And if you really think about it, again, it's another provocation. If you're a Christian, just imagine you have a church and all of a sudden members of another completely different religion just crash their way on in and start doing whatever it is that they do up on the altar of your church. And you can understand why the Palestinians are very upset about this. By the way, we just recently had the 30th anniversary of the Sabra and Shatila massacre in Lebanon. Hardly anybody noticed, and certainly it was not being marked by the corporate media. Several hundred Palestinians were butchered by Israeli proxies in Lebanon on September 16th, 1982. That math does not work out. This must have been an outdated article. Alrighty. Now, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're still talking about Israel. And apparently a busload of IDF soldiers clashed with Palestinians at the Kalandia refugee camp in the West Bank after the vehicle entered the camp. Obviously, that's going to be upsetting for the people who are living there. Israel is claiming it was an accident, that they just sort of accidentally drove into this refugee camp. The Palestinians started throwing rocks at the Israeli vehicle. At least one female officer was lightly injured by a stone. Jerusalem Post then commented that the rescue of the soldiers was underway. So this may also be escalating as well. Now, there's an Israeli company is getting ready to invest about $50 million in a weapons factory in the Philippines. Apparently, the Philippines are a major customer of Israeli-made weapons, and so this company is deciding, let's just make them right down there where the customers are, and we'll make all kinds of money, and people will get shot to death here. Over in Yemen, things are going very, very bad for the people there. It's a humanitarian disaster. And apparently, the Saudi-led coalition struck the Navy school in Yemen's Hodeidah. And there are no immediate reports on the scale of the destruction or the number of victims. But the war is continuing over there as well. NATO has announced it's going to build a massive command and control center in Afghanistan's capital. And the structure is planned to be a 3-story, 120,000 square foot concrete building. It will have 800 work spaces. And all of the details are being kept under wraps here. This was reported in Stars and Stripes. Now, it's very interesting. If you're going to have a command and control center, a major one, look how far north they're situating it. Okay. Not too long ago, there was another story coming out of Salisbury, England, where two people who were eating at this restaurant, the Prezzo restaurant in Salisbury, came down ill. And immediately everybody said, oh, it's another nerve gas attack. It's another nerve gas attack. And the British authorities are now acknowledging, no, there was no nerve agent. It was just the food was less than healthy. I still think that's really what happened to Sergei Skripal and Yulia, because the restaurant where they were eating was not only a pasta place, but a seafood place. And if you're not careful with that seafood, you can really get people seriously, seriously ill. But they were looking for something. We can blame Russia. It's a nerve agent. It's Novichok. Just more of the propaganda. More of the propaganda. Article coming on out from The Intercept, and it's talking about how the U.S. military is now concerned that large parts of Africa are being seized by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram. Well, that shouldn't be a problem because ISIS and Al-Qaeda work for the United States. But they're basically setting the stage for military escalation all over Africa. And again, most Americans didn't even know that we were in Africa until 4 of our soldiers got killed in an ambush in Niger. Moscow is saying that Russia and Ukraine will inevitably overcome the crisis after there's a change of government in Kiev. And the comment was issued after Ukrainian President Poroshenko signed a decree yesterday terminating the Treaty on Friendship, Cooperation, and Partnership between Ukraine and Russia. And Ukrainian Foreign Minister Pavel Klimkin told the press the termination of the Framework Friendship Treaty would cause a major revision of other agreements between Moscow and Kiev, but did not specify details. So they're basically tearing up the peace agreements here. Over in North Korea, South Korea's leader, Moon Jae-in, has now visited Pyongyang. I think the first South Korean president to visit the North in a very long time. In fact, maybe even going back to the cessation of hostilities in the Korean War. And he was greeted with shouts for reunification. Everyone in Korea is talking reunification. It's an idea whose time has come. After all, it worked out very well for Germany. But the United States is opposing the North and South Korea's push to finally officially end the Korean War. And Moon Jae-in, when he was at this meeting in Pyongyang, said, what we want is peace, not a tentative change that could be volatile depending upon the international situation, but irreversible, permanent, and unwavering, regardless of what might happen in the global area. He's talking about reunification. He's dropping hints. That's what they want to do. Now, the Trump administration is basically making it clear they aren't willing to reach a peace deal yet. They're not willing to end the Korean War. And they will only do so after North Korea goes through years of additional concessions. So we'll see what's going to happen there. All right, so let's talk about what's going on with Judge Kavanaugh. This has turned into a real circus. And you have to go back to this lady, this very ultra-liberal California professor, Christine Ford, who is out there selling this story that she was attacked by Kavanaugh at a beer party at a house, and that she actually feared that he could kill her. But then the story gets kind of vague. She doesn't remember who drove her to the party. She doesn't say how much she drank. She doesn't remember whose house it was. She doesn't recall who, if anyone, drove her home. She doesn't recall what day it was. Now, a lot of people are saying, why did you not report it at the time? And Ford has now come on out with a change to the story saying she did not tell her parents or anyone because she didn't want them to know she had been drinking. Obviously, she was underage at the time. So she didn't tell anybody at all until she told a therapist in 2012. And in the therapist's notes, Kavanaugh's name is not mentioned. And the story is a little different, because the current story coming from Christine Ford is that there were two guys. And Kavanaugh pushed her on the bed and tried to undress her, which, by the way, is really kind of a dumb way to do it. When you're lying on top of somebody, getting their clothes off doesn't really work all that well. And then this other guy who was in the room at the time pulled Kavanaugh off, and that's when they left. But in the version told to her therapist, there were four men in the room. And now the latest version that's coming on out is saying there were other girls there as well. And none of them came forward to tell the story. Larry Klayman is out there saying that Kavanaugh and Christine Ford must take polygraphs. And unfortunately, I have to disagree, because polygraphs are notoriously unreliable. They are inadmissible as evidence in court. And I know from personal experience, because one time I was given a polygraph and it produced false results. And it took a great deal of convincing to say, look, I don't know what's wrong with that machine, but it's wrong. Meanwhile, Senator Dianne Feinstein is just out there gunning for Kavanaugh. She's pushing back on the hearing for Christine Ford. So here you have the situation. Republicans gave in to the Democrats by agreeing to hear Ford's case. Now, Feinstein got this letter back in July, but they sprang it on Kavanaugh just now. So the Republicans have set up a committee hearing to actually hear Ford out, which plays right into the Democrats' hands, because they're just going to take everything that he says in there and spin it to make it look like it's guilt. Feinstein is out there saying that she really doesn't care in participating in the Senate investigation. She just wants to have the event. It's just more political trickery. Now, as of right now, Christine Ford, we're getting mixed reports about whether she's willing to show up to this hearing. And some are saying, yes, she's going to go. Others are saying, no, she doesn't feel that she needs to go and defend her accusations. Chuck Grassley is saying that if Christine Ford does not accept an invitation, they're going to call the hearing off. They're not just going to put Kavanaugh up there and let him get pounded on by every Democrat in the room. So far, they have not heard back from Christine Ford on this thing. This is pure political theater. This is Anita Hill all over again. And everybody knows what's going on. There's an article in The Federalist saying Democrats have made sure that Brett Kavanaugh will never get a fair hearing. And they're starting out saying there is no evidence that anything happened. But at the same time, in this highly charged, feminist-dominated liberal environment, there's nothing he can say or do that will clear his name. To the eyes of the liberals, accusation equals guilt. Rape is such a serious crime that even innocence cannot be used as a defense. If you're a man in this country, a single, uncorroborated account that dates back to 1982 is all your political critics need to accuse you of attempted rape. Now, there's another aspect that we all need to take a look at. There is nothing else in Kavanaugh's background that suggests this kind of behavior. Far cry from Roy Moore or Bill Clinton, whose entire life was one sexual assault after the other after the other. There's nothing in Kavanaugh's background. They haven't found anything. So it doesn't seem like Kavanaugh's that kind of guy. Now, the group opposing Kavanaugh, they've got a huge budget. They're spending millions of dollars to fight the Kavanaugh confirmation. It's being run by a former Feinstein aide. And as I mentioned before, Fox News is reporting they're launching an ad campaign to basically say, yes, he did it. We can't have an attempted rapist on the Supreme Court. And again, they're going on this principle of accusation equals guilt. We don't need to prove anything. Remember, Christine's lawyer came out the other day and said it's not up to her to defend her allegations. You just take her word at face value. And again, as I've mentioned before, back in the 1990s, during the height of the militant feminist male bash phenomenon, if you will, rape became the second most falsely reported crime in the entire country, according to the FBI's supplemental crime statistics. The National Organization of Women actually opposed the use of DNA tests to find out if an accused man had really done it or not. That it was insulting to women to have to do a DNA test. It implied that they might not be truthful, which many of them turned out to be. And a lot of innocent guys got sent to jail. Paul Craig Roberts came out with an article talking about all this. Evidence is no longer a Western value. And he's talking about how these days feminist students at Western universities who are offended by scientific fact denounce scientists for speaking truth that contradicts the feminist ideology. And the university administrations haul the scientists before hearings, ideologically prepared to declare the scientist, if male, a misogynist, and basically try and keep certain scientific papers from being published. We were talking about one the other day that was talking about the performance differences between men and women at both the top and the bottom of society. It's a legitimate area of study because it's an observable phenomenon, but it's now been taken down. It's not politically correct. The political ideology is now what's controlling everything. Not the science, not the facts, not the evidence, not the truth, but the political ideology. Political correctness, that decides everything. And by the way, that was another feature found in the Soviet Union before it collapsed, where everything that was being done had to go through that political filter. And one of the greatest disasters that resulted from that was Lysenkoism. And that was during Stalin's time, where he had this scientist who was being exalted the way Al Gore is today, who claimed he had a way of tricking spring wheat to germinate more quickly, and then that trait would be passed on to subsequent generations. And it failed miserably. It resulted in a massive famine, and the Soviet Union was actually forced to buy grain from the United States of America. Okay, so again, from the Daily Caller, another discrepancy emerges in Christine Ford's story. Katz has revealed that there was another girl present at the party. So basically the story is just fragmenting. And I can imagine Christine Ford is going to be very reluctant to go before that Senate hearing because there have been so many contradictions in her story. And I hope Grassley does cancel it. It's playing into the Democrats' hands. They are desperate to get this man out. They don't want another conservative on the bench. And they're playing every dirty trick that they can. Now, remember, Christine Ford has motives to go after Kavanaugh because Judge Kavanaugh's mother, Martha Kavanaugh, was also a judge, ruled in a case involving Christine Ford's parents in a foreclosure. So Christine definitely has a reason to want to harm him. It turns out Christine Ford's brother worked for the law firm that paid Fusion GPS for work with a Russian lawyer who set up the Trump Tower meeting. So interesting company that he keeps. All right, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And despite all the Democrats' delaying tactics and dirty tricks, let's call it what it is, the vote for confirmation will be held Thursday. And they're expecting there are going to be massive liberal protesters outside. And so this last minute Me Too accusation did not succeed in delaying the confirmation vote. What the Democrats are trying to do is to convince some Republicans not to vote in favor of confirmation. And I can imagine the amount of pressure that is being brought to bear on some of these senators. Now, out here in Hawaii, our Senator Mazie Hirono is literally saying that the Democrats could keep this seat vacant for the next 2 years if they have to. They're planning on winning or stealing the Senate this November. And at that point, they will simply block every single conservative justice nominated by Donald Trump in the expectation they're going to get a liberal Democrat president in 2020, by hook or by crook, most likely by crook. So that's what they're playing for. They're absolutely terrified of a conservative Supreme Court, which would unravel a lot of some of this nonsense that has been foisted on the American people in the name of liberalism. And I know there's going to be a big debate over abortion. And as I said before, I'm not happy with Kavanaugh's view of mass surveillance of the American people. He doesn't seem to feel it's a Fourth Amendment problem. But I think taking the court more conservative would be a good idea. The problem is, if the Democrats succeed in bringing Kavanaugh down, it will be impossible to nominate and confirm another candidate between now and November. And that's why the Democrats were trying to drag this out. Another article that came on out from Paul Craig Roberts, and he says, basically, we are in a new civil war. We're not using weapons yet, but the U.S. is in a civil war in every way short of using arms. The institutions won't save us anymore because they no longer mean anything. There are two sides which are equally unchangeable in their minds. And both sides are not driven by the same principles. You can call it a fight between idealism versus realism, which is exactly what it is. The liberals are idealists. They dream of this amazing world. And conservatives want to deal with the world as it actually is. But it is splitting the nation in two. Now, one of our callers was mentioning that the American coasts are the bastions of liberal elitism. And they've been calling the core of America deplorables, flyover country, like you're not important. If you're not on a coast, you're just not important here. Biden was out there giving a speech to an LGBTQ group and described Trump supporters as virulent dregs of society. All right, we're going to take a break here for station identification. Back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. We're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines again, 800-313-9443. Apparently, Dianne Feinstein admitted today that she can't say that everything is truthful about the sexual assault allegations against Kavanaugh brought forth by Christine Ford. In other words, she's backpedaling, which means there may be something out there in the wind that would discredit Christine Ford completely. And Feinstein wants to de-link and distance herself from that. Meanwhile, Mad Maxine Waters has upped her calls for violence against the president, encouraging a resistance to, quote, knock off, end quote, Trump. Now, knock off, that's not much gray area in that one, and I don't know why the Secret Service isn't talking to her about this, but apparently she made the comment while accepting a diversity award in Washington, D.C. this weekend, and she took the opportunity at the podium to once again go on the warpath against President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. So I'm sensing another bit of strategy out there. The Democrats are desperate to take the House of Representatives, and if they do, that means the Speaker of the House would be a Democrat. And if both Trump and Mike Pence are brought down somehow, the next in the line of succession is the Speaker of the House, and the liberal Democrats have a liberal Democrat president in the White House. What a disaster for this nation that would be. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, Andrea. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael Rivera. My hair is standing on end. I know I'm not the only one because I hear all these other people talking about the immature way the Democrats are acting. They're not acting. They are actually being themselves.
Yes.
Which is obnoxious. And if it were any of us normal people that are just tax-paying people that went up there and tried to pull this stuff, we would be thrown into jail. And I don't think that they should have any right to get by with this stuff. If anybody threatened a policeman, they would be thrown into jail. And this is our commander-in-chief. This is our president. We, the people, voted for this man. We want we want these people to back off. And I don't know how we do it if we don't have a government that won't enforce the laws and make them pay for what they're doing. They have no... you don't do that to a policeman, so why are they getting by with threatening and saying assassination and being so blatant? I just, it's like, good gosh, I think, it's hard to even talk about this because it's so emotional that they can get by with it. And, back in the olden days, and this is a long time, I'm just a little bit younger than you. And, people back in those days, they indicated they could leave their door. Now, this is kind of off the subject, but they could leave their doors unlocked because nobody would, they knew that they could get shot or hung. The laws were the laws. And it's like we've thrown the laws out the window and we don't abide by anything. We just allow people to run over us no matter what. And it's just so frustrating that these people won't back down. It's just, it leaves you with the whole feeling of you're wishing them dead and gone. And because they are getting by with so much that they ought not to get by with. There are laws. And if we cannot abide by laws, what's the point of having laws? It's just, let's just go back to the old Western times. And if there's somebody that cuts up, people would stand, they knew not to get out of and pull this stuff back in the olden days because you could get shot real easily. But,
as much as I'm an admirer of the history of the Old West, and a lot of it has been distorted, by the way, I don't think we want to go there. But we remember back in 2016, especially after the election, we were seeing all this rioting going on by the liberals out in California, and we kept seeing all these stories where the police were literally ordered to stand down by their superiors. So, yeah, the people who are behaving this way, they're being protected by the deep state. They're being presented as victims by the corporate media. It's a very, very skewed system, and it is very frustrating and angering to see Americans behave like this because it is dangerous, and we literally we could see an explosion of violence in the streets in America.
Well, they're pushing everybody to this point that, okay, let's get back to the policeman. You cannot make any threatening gestures, any verbal anything without going to jail. There should be no way that these people are asking that they want to assassinate our president. That they're doing it everywhere, and it's like, no way, and they're not being arrested. They're not paying anything for this. It's like, how does I can see where other countries would be like going, what is going on over there in America? Whenever in their countries, whenever something goes wrong like that, there are riots in the street. So I am so disappointed with the way people are. I mean, it's like if this goes on and this is allowed to go on, what else would go on? I mean, because they're throwing laws out the window. To heck with laws. We'll just do whatever we want to do, and to heck with everybody else. And if they win, well, we can claim that they need to assassinate whoever they vote in, or however they get whoever they get into office. I mean, eventually, things start with in abusive relationships. They start out as calling names. Then it works into a slap, and then it gets into a fist, and then it grows into people pulling guns and shooting, and then you've got all right, it works its way up into these confrontations, and it's getting there because nobody's stopping it because there's no laws anymore. What's the point? I don't think we should have a government. Let's just throw them all out and just say. I don't know what.
I'm definitely in favor of that last one because, our government is operating outside the law. They're chipping away at the Constitution. They are ignoring the laws. It's a lawless government. It's a crime organization is really what it is. And you're absolutely right. They are ignoring their own laws. I mean, it is a federal offense merely to threaten the life of the president. And yet Maxine Waters is out there. She's being euphemistic about it. But I think pretty much everybody understands what knockoff is a euphemism for.
Yeah, I'm tired of it. The saying, I can't stand it anymore. I can't take it anymore. It's. I know I'm not the only one. It's all over the place now. I'm hearing it everywhere, and I don't know. When is it going to stop? It's like, where is some justice? Where is somebody going to arrest one of these people and put them in their place and say, look, we have laws against this, write them up, throw the book at them. And at this point, it's just insane. So that's my 2 cents, and thank you for listening to me.
All right. Well, thank you for the phone call, Andrea. And very obviously, the laws that do exist are selectively enforced. I mean, look at all the stuff the Clintons got away with. And nothing happened, and that's why our federal government is operating like a crime mob, organized crime ring, where we've got enforcers against the little people, but the big people are never touched.
It needs to stop.
I agree, but I think it's going to bring itself to destruction in the very near future, and that's what I'm holding out for, because I don't want to see a civil war in the streets of America. I don't want to see violence in the streets of America any more than we already have. But this is a very dark time for our nation, and we are becoming so much like the former Soviet Union. And when I was a kid, I never, ever thought I was going to see this nation become what it has become, and it's disappointing, to put it lightly. Okay, Andrea, we're going to let you go here. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates, and before we take the next phone call, a couple more stories I want to get on in here. Apparently, in their final days when they were still at the FBI, Peter Strzok and Andrew McCabe were caught destroying evidence and documents, and they were nabbed by a sting operation. They weren't supposed to be destroying the evidence. I mean, and they were. Why have they not been called up for charges on that? That's obstruction of justice right there. Now, Senator Marco Rubio has asked the Department of Justice to investigate whether former Secretary of State John Kerry broke the law by meeting with the Iranian foreign minister after Trump took office. And yeah, it does seem like Kerry did cross a line based on that last report that we had on his meeting there. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Mark in Philadelphia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. If, according to Smedley Butler, war is a racket,
yes,
and according to you, all wars are bankers' wars, what does that make our active military men and women and veterans? What does that make them?
The enforcers. You know, the button men, the guys with the machine guns who go on out and actually commit the crimes.
Yes. I say even more, pawns. They're pawns, and unwitting pawns, many if not most.
Yes.
But surely by now, more have awakened. I want to bring something to your attention that I just found out about. I myself am a veteran. I come from a long line of veterans. I had been adopted, so I didn't know this till about a year and a half ago. My older half brother was in Vietnam. My father was in at the end of World War II. My grandfather, his father, was at the beginning of World War II, right after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And my great-great-grandfather served in the Civil War, and he was a prisoner of war in Andersonville, Georgia, for 11 months. He survived hell. So now there's an article. Something just happened about a month ago. It's an article on militarytimes.com. What happens now that veterans can file class action suits against the VA? Wow. August 23rd, the panel, the Veterans Appeals, U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, ruled that in appropriate cases, class action lawsuits against VA will be allowed. Now, this is big, Mike, because a few years back, I don't know if you remember that guy, George Bush Jr. I think it was under his watch that the medical industry, pharmaceuticals and medical doctors and all this, got behind the idea that tort reform would be a good idea for, limiting their liability. So if something happens, if it hasn't happened in the last 2 years to you, like detrimentally, like concerning the healthcare, then chances are you have no recourse individually. Now, and especially with veterans, and sometimes things happen and it takes longer to ferret out what actually happened and what was the cause, and it may be beyond that 2-year period. So anyway, the class action lawsuit status gives us the ability to do a great reveal, and the reveal that I would like to be a part of is that the pharmaceutical industry is pushing psychotropic drugs wrongfully, harmfully, onto veterans. The majority of veterans, the VA system is the largest healthcare system in the United States, and the majority of veterans who go to the VA system for healthcare go to the mental health clinic for counseling. But in order to interact with them, you have to, who oversees the mental health clinic? It's not psychologists, it's psychiatrists. Okay. So in order to interact with them, you have to have some kind of a diagnosis, and then what comes with that is a drug of some sort. So now they're loosening it up just a little bit so guys can go for counseling without having to take drugs, but before it was you weren't able to see anybody unless you signed up for their whole program, which included taking drugs. So anyway, the SSRIs and the classification of SSRIs are absolutely dangerous. In my book, they're dangerous to mankind. This could be a great reveal that the VA has harmed many and continues to harm through the prescribing of these drugs. And now this is something very surprising to me. Now, when I was in, which was the late 70s, early 80s, I never heard of I didn't know anything about these kind of drugs or any of this psychiatry. But I never caught wind that anybody was taking drugs while on active duty. I don't know if you knew this, Mike, but they are prescribing and have been for some time. The military doctors have been prescribing drugs to active duty military personnel. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I was aware of that. The Pentagon spends more money on medications than they do on Black Hawk helicopters.
Oh, that's really so. I take that as that it's a weapon. And the thing about the people out there need to know that we veterans are informed about the Constitution, this thing called the Constitution, and the protection of the nation, the protection of the people of the nation, and the protection of the guidelines called the Constitution that we are supposed to live by and abide by. And, hopefully guides us to a better place. But we're not operating under that Constitution, and the evildoers know this, and they know that the ones that, when they find out and really awaken, the group that could be the formidable opponent would be the veterans, and also many of us are trained in knowing how to oppose an enemy, so they don't like that. So that's the group they're trying to destroy. Really, they're whittling the guys down. And by the way, I called into Al Whitney's show on Saturday night, and she's onto this too. Her husband is a retired doctor, and she's really into the uncovering and revealing what the SSRIs are all about, really. And anyway, when I called her, she told me that her daughter had a coworker just last week, who died, and it was a veteran. And how did he die? Suicide. And when the daughter told Al about it, then Al said, "Well, could you go back and check out and ask a few more questions, like was he taking any medications?" Well, sure enough, he was taking antidepressants. Mm-hmm. So now that's not to say that caused it, but I'm telling you, is it a coincidence? I don't think so. So the thing is, on the bigger picture, is this could be a big reveal to the masses of our nation. And even bigger would be the idea, they're prescribing these dangerous drugs to children.
Yes.
To children.
No, we talk about this. We talk about that on this show all the time. I don't know. Are you familiar with the website ssristories.com?
Yes.
Yeah,
and,
because they got all these case
name.
studies here. Now, there's another dimension to all of this, and that is that, as you said, the fact that all these veterans are combat trained, they're loyal to the Constitution, being a threat to the powers that think they are. There has been a lot of talk lately that any veteran who is adjudged to be mentally ill following their term of service can be denied their Second Amendment rights. And so,
right. And on that note, that is highly subjective instead of objective, which means an individual psychiatrist could say, "Well, yeah, I think you're a little bit off, so I'm writing it down, and here's the diagnosis." And by the way, that DSMV or DSM or whatever it's called, the one they go by that has all the diagnoses, it's growing by leaps and bounds, and that supports their whole storyline and their whole godplex. I call it a godplex because I think psychiatrists, I think they're evil. I'm sorry. There might be some good ones in there, but they have to know they're doing harm. They're doing more harm than good. And
it's a religion. I mean, it's not science. There is no machine that you can hook up to a patient where it'll light up and say manic depressive or psychotic or anything. You're right. It's all subjective, and because they make a lot of money issuing diagnoses and prescriptions, it's a self-perpetuating system. Anyway, Mark, I got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And on Fox News, they just had Dianne Feinstein saying that Christine Ford has not been called to testify before the Senate panel. Something has happened. Now, supposedly, the Senate panel has been unable to get a response from either Christine Ford or from her lawyer. So I'm going to take a wild guess here, and it is a wild guess, that something just popped up to discredit Christine Ford. And they've decided they're not going to raise on this busted flush here. Meanwhile, apparently, over on Long Island, there's this woman who's been arrested for faking a Trump-related hate crime. Now, this woman, 19-year-old Adwoa Lewis, gave detectives a written statement stating she was driving home back on September 2nd when 4 teenagers confronted her. And she claimed the teens yelled Trump 2016 and said that she didn't belong there. And then she also told police that she parked outside her home and woke up with a slashed tire along with a note that said "Go home" on her vehicle the next morning. And investigators have basically determined that she faked the whole thing. And Lewis has now admitted she wrote the note, put it on the car, made it all up. There's a lot of fakery going on out there in the hate crimes environment. And you need to be aware of it. People do lie. And so I think we need to reject this idea that we're getting from the feminists that the mere accusation of an attempted rape by Christine Ford is all the information that we need. No, it's not. It's an accusation, and it's easy to make an accusation. This Long Island woman just proved it once again. It's unfortunately become part of the American political culture. If you want attention, if you want to make a political point, if you want to get around embarrassing facts or something, stage a hate crime. Paint a swastika on your own door or your car. Now here's an article, this is from LouRockwell.com, and it's talking about how the Constitution is being functionally suspended. And today the federal government does whatever it wants to do without any controls whatsoever. And we, the people, have been terrorized, traumatized, and tricked into a semi-permanent state of compliance by a government that cares nothing for our lives or liberties. They're there for the money, for the power, for the conquest. That's where we're going here. All right, let's talk quickly about the aftermath of Florence. As I said before, I don't mean to act callous or insincere. Looking at the aerial footage of the flooding, I mean, entire houses have been submerged. Apparently, Wilmington, North Carolina is literally now an island. It's been cut off by the rising floodwaters, and people are dying out there. Over at the nuclear plant on Brunswick, they're expecting a 60-foot, that's 60-foot flood to inundate that nuclear plant. And apparently there are now 9 nuclear plants considered in the path of the storm and the flood. Now, some of these plants rushed to install waterproof doors on the containment vessels, on the outer shell of the reactor. What is unknown is how well they're going to survive long-term flooding. You know, if it's just a day or two, that's one thing. If it's a week, nobody really knows what could happen there. Now, U.S. nuclear plants are required to shut down 2 hours before any hurricane force winds arrive. And so there are now 9 reactors, which means probably they're going to be rolling blackouts on top of everything else that's gone wrong. Those poor people. Okay, we really did run late on our talking points here today. Getting into the economic news, the U.S.-China trade war is heating up. Beijing is hitting back at U.S. President Trump's new tariffs. They're going to match it point for point and enact them on the exact same day. Now, Jack Ma is out there saying that, left to itself, this China trade war could last for 20 years. And I have to wonder about the advisability of Trump provoking China economically at the same time tensions are rising over the issues of Taiwan and the South China Sea. Right now, it is projected that the U.S. national debt will hit $99 trillion, that's with a T, by 2048. Now, I remember back in the 1990s, there was a measure that was making the rounds of the state houses called the Ultimatum Resolution. And it simply said, when the national debt goes over $16 trillion, the federal government is dissolved, but they couldn't get enough state legislatures to vote it through. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take a phone call now from Mo in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Mo. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, thank you very much, Sir Rivero, taking my call. You know, regarding this massive amount of rain in Northeast and South Carolina, and still is keep going. It's not yet finished. It's going to other states as well. And, you know, these nuclear facilities that you were talking about, yes, they shut them down, as you mentioned, but this rain mixing with all the poisons and etc. from nuclear facilities, underground, pipes. So God help us, because this is, to me, was very, very bad, and it's looked like a red dawn tree is in progress. What do you think, please?
Well, my concern, the actual reactor, the active reactor cores are shut down, but they still have to be cooled. And if there are used fuel rods being stored on the grounds of these power plants, they need to be cooled. And if these things get flooded out to the point where the cooling systems stop, then you're looking at some major meltdowns.
Absolutely. And, we are in a very bad situation, and millions of people are misplaced, and still, they keep showing. But there is a media blackout, because we keep listening to North Carolina news, South Carolina news. Just they keep showing about hurricane, and they little bit they show about the damages has been done to the people's property, and only 25% of the people were insured. Yes. And what will happen to those people? So basically, we have added to the homeless community of United States another 1 million or more. I mean, that's not right.
Yeah, it's a dangerous situation, and I'm wondering how many of those reactors in the path of the storm are those General Electric designs like they had at Fukushima, which did not react very well to being massively flooded. This could get very ugly. Why they don't put these things up on hills, knowing that they're in a floodplain, is just amazing.
Yes, indeed. And we appreciate your show, and we appreciate RBN from first show to the last show. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Well, thank you very much for the call. We're going to let you go. And getting on back to the economic news, it's been 10 years since the mortgage-backed security meltdown, and people still don't trust banks. They got a real wake-up call about just how crooked some of these financial institutions were. And there, of course, have been several scandals since then involving some of the biggest name banks out there: Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. And so a lot of people are wondering just how trustworthy the banks are, and maybe we'd be better off keeping our money, someplace else, buried in the mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation or some such thing as that, which is, of course, why the banks are pushing so hard for a cashless society, because they don't want you to have the choice of having your own wealth in your own hand. They want it all. And if you're an obedient little slave, they'll let you buy some food or some clothing, and the cash never actually touches your hand. It just goes from card to computer to another computer, and that's it. But it's always remaining in the bank. It means that there can never be a run on the bank if the banks get in trouble. Just everybody's savings just disappear in a flash of electricity. There is good reason not to trust banks and bankers because of the way they have been behaving. Hungary is now asking Russia to plan on extending the Turkish Stream pipeline into Europe. And this will be a very good thing for Europe and for Russia, for their respective economies. And it will also mean that Ukraine cannot hold Russia gas hostage by putting their hands on that valve. So that would be a good idea. Russia's out there making deals. The U.S. is making war. Russia is making deal. Now, speaking of Hungary, Orban's visit to Moscow basically is flipping the bird to the EU after last week's EU vote to invoke Article 7 and strip Hungary of their voting powers. Now, the good news is it's not a done deal. It turns out that in order to invoke Article 7 on any member nation of the EU, the vote must be unanimous among all the EU nations, and there are already 2 nations who are saying no, they will not vote to go forward with that. So we're seeing more dissension in the ranks. Now, interestingly enough, CNN was commenting on how back in 1989, Viktor Orban, who was at that time a Western-acclaimed liberal opposition leader, was calling for Soviet troops to leave Hungary, and now that he's prime minister, he is cozying up to Vladimir Putin. Well, it's actually the same reason. Orban wanted his country to be independent then, and he wants it to be independent now. In 1989, Hungary was a satellite of the former Soviet Union. Whatever Hungarians wanted, they had to follow directives from Moscow and adhere to Soviet communist ideology. Today, Hungary is ordered to follow directives from Brussels and adhere to the EU political ideology, which is codenamed our common values, which don't seem to be all that common across the European Union, especially with regards to the open borders issue. Here's an amazing story. There was an Indian pilot, an Air India flight, coming into New York City on a Boeing 777 Model 300. And this Captain Rustam Palia basically pulled off a miracle. Apparently all kinds of systems were failing on the 777. And the TCAS wasn't working. They had only one radio altimeter. Just everything. There was no auto land system, no wind shear systems, no auto speed brake. The APU apparently wouldn't turn on. And, no automatic landing system because they couldn't receive the ILS signals. And this pilot succeeded in successfully landing this 777 entirely under manual control. So he's being proclaimed a hero. He saved 370 lives. Now, that is a massive system failure on that 777. And are we looking at issues of poor maintenance at Air India? Or is there another design flaw lurking inside the aircraft, which had a bit of a troubled past? But for all those systems to go on out at the same time, it was a miracle this pilot pulled it off. And it's another reminder that maybe airlines should re-emphasize manual control of an aircraft. These days, most pilots don't fly the plane all that much. They just sit up front pushing buttons, and the plane will go from where it starts to where it ends. And that's all well and good. Makes for a very comfortable economic flight. But I think because of what happened in New York City, that airlines would be well advised to reemphasize actual training pilot skills, to literally, physically fly the plane if they have to. Okay, now there is a new study that's come on out. It's a group of 17 physicians who have been studying this controversial issue over statins. And basically, there's a new study based on data of around 1.3 million patients, which basically undermines this claim that LDL-C, known as bad cholesterol, is a cause of heart disease. And they're saying that doctors doling out statins as a main form of treatment for heart disease is of doubtful belief. A doubtful benefit, rather. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, what I'm thinking, what you kind of say about Hungary, and I've been following it a little bit myself, is I think you're going to start seeing Eastern Europe now drifting back towards aligning itself with Russia. Slowly but surely, because they're seeing that, like you said, the EU is basically the Soviet Union gone from east to west. I call the EU actually a combination, a hybrid of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. The Soviet because there are certain things that they have in common with each. And NATO basically is more in line with with Nazi Germany, the way they try to overrun other nations, occupy other nations. And the odd thing is today Israel has become a mini Nazi Germany. It's amazing,
Oh, so, you can't say that. It's anti-Semitic to equate Israel with Nazi Germany. Shame on you.
Guess what? Let them call me anti-Semitic. I'll show you. The fact of the matter is, I was born Jewish, so it doesn't matter to me. They're acting, I call a spade, and Israel is acting like a miniature Nazi Germany. Okay, and on top of that, they're supplying Ukraine, which really has a lot of Nazis running it, going right. And I'm not talking about neo-Nazis either. And they're supplying them with the weapons. So you tell me about Israel. How wonderful of a country that is. I think and I also want to say this about Vladimir Putin. I saw somebody on Facebook, a Russian guy, made a comment that the world should thank Putin and Russia for saving the world from nuclear annihilation. Both. Fact of the matter is, you see it again. He's doing everything he can, that man, to start to control himself and not be a hothead. Because personally, if I was in charge of Russia today, after what they did to that plane, the Knesset, I would have launched some missiles at the Knesset and try to get Netanyahu out once and for all. But I'm kind of hot-headed in that. He's not. He understands the situation. He understands what nuclear war would be. I mean, when you talk about global warming, I think it would be about 1,500 degrees above zero or something like that, but Fahrenheit. Yeah. So he understands that, and I don't envy the man. He's dealing with psychopaths all over the West, U.S., Britain, France, Israel, and other countries. He's constantly under, they're lying about Russia. They're constantly provoking them. Ukraine, of course. He's constantly got to do that, and he's trying to play a balancing act. And it's not easy. He is, to me, the greatest statesman in the world today. I don't care what anybody says.
He's the only adult in the room.
We can thank God that he's there. Because if it was somebody like, I believe the guy Uranovsky in Russia, a very hot-headed guy, I think we'd be, like you say, we'd be looking out the window at mushroom clouds all over the place. I don't know. I guess I'll let you finish it up, okay, Mike?
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. And yeah, Putin is the only adult in the room right now, and it does seem very insane how so many of the world's leaders are just pushing ahead with a major war, and apparently oblivious to the fact that it could easily spin out of control and wind up going nuclear. And that's going to be a bad day for everybody. I don't know. Are all these leaders on prescription antidepressants? Is Netanyahu on antidepressants? Is Trump on antidepressants? Are we looking at an insane situation where our world leaders have literally drugged themselves into making that big mistake number 3? Because it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Okay. Getting on back to science and health issues, apparently, according to researchers, more than 10% of U.S. kids have been diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And doctors are not sure why so many kids have ADHD. Well, because you make money with it. You prescribe them medications. Now, remember, the guy who actually came up with that phrase, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, admitted shortly before he passed away, it's a made-up condition. It's made up purely to sell medications, to get your money. It's a fraud. It's a fake. It's quackery. Now, do you remember this ridiculous situation where Elon Musk insulted one of the divers who rescued the 12 kids trapped in a cave in Thailand, British citizen. And for some reason, Elon Musk came out and said the man was a pedophile. Well, the British citizen has finally had enough of this nonsense, and he's suing Elon Musk for defamation. And Elon is just doing all kind. I think he's self-destructing right before our eyes, along with Tesla itself here. Oddly enough, Neil deGrasse Tyson has come to his defense, saying Elon is the only game in town. He's the best thing since Edison. Let the man get high. And I'm in agreement that marijuana should be decriminalized, but I think Elon sent the wrong message by smoking that marijuana-laced cigar on a live broadcast. And there's now talk it may actually cost him some of his government security clearances. Because even if it's legal, if you're doing drugs, you will lose your clearance here. Over in Germany, they have come up with something really nifty. They have unveiled the world's first hydrogen-powered train, which is going to be environmentally friendly compared to diesel trains. And it's basically ready for serial production. They're going to just start cranking these things on out. There is a product other countries are going to want to buy. And we could have done that here in the United States if we weren't blowing all of our money on wars. But good for Germany. Good for Germany. They're making that hydrogen technology work. There we are. Speaking of marijuana, apparently Coca-Cola is looking at producing soft drinks with marijuana in them to market in the states where recreational marijuana has been decriminalized. Sounds a little weird to me, but hey, who knows? We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our show today after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, last segment of our program today. And getting into the world of computers here a little bit. As you probably know, I'm not really big on computer games. The only things I like to play with on the computer are flight simulators. But a lot of people are really into games. It's a big business, and a lot of these games get very addictive. And according to a new report from Divorce Online, over 200 British couples in 2018, just this year, cited Fortnite and other video games as the reason their marriage came to an end. And partners are seemingly growing tired of getting the cold shoulder from their spouse who's just plugged into that little controller. And of course, there's also the financial strain because you buy add-ons for these various games as well. And it is an addiction. And along with other addictions like drug, alcohol, and gambling, it's now being cited in divorce filings. Okay, now, apparently, over in the Long Beach Police Department, police officers are using an app on their cell phone called Tiger Text. And the concern is that this Tiger Text is a text message system that sends text messages back and forth, which after a period of time are deleted and completely erased. They can't even be recovered with a forensic analysis of the phone. And the concern is that these police are using this app to conceal evidence, to keep their communications on there, knowing it's going to be destroyed, so that there's no record left behind of what they're doing, what's going on. I think that's a little sleazy. Remember all these times, we're going to have body cams to make sure we're behaving, and then, somebody just got beaten up. Where's the body cam footage? Well, gosh darn it, the body cam just happened to quit working, was malfunctioning that day. Golly gee willikers here. Meanwhile, over in the Ozarks, there's a school. Springfield Public School System is being accused by parents of accessing their personal accounts and storing their private information on the school system's Google Drive without their permission. And the claim is that the SPS Google Drive given to all SPS employees and students automatically begins to share information from any device the drive is accessed on, including browser history, personal information, files, and passwords. And apparently this one family, the Eli's, were looking at what was on their daughter's Google Drive. They found 139 passwords to both her and her husband's different accounts, and not the student, the mother's personal account, and voice recordings of both her and her children. So the voice to text was being stored as well. This is an incredible breach of privacy. Now, the Springfield Public School System's response was to say, we believe our data systems remain safe and secure. We have detected no breaches. Not a word of explanation why they're even capturing all of this data. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Keep reminding everybody that Facebook, Google, Twitter, and YouTube are now heavily censoring news. In fact, I got an email. Facebook is blocking that story about how Russia is taking Israel to the International Criminal Court over what happened in Syria last night. So we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.